Polar Expeditions by Ryan Utek and Jayden Childers. What is a polar expedition? A polar expedition is an exploration of Antarctica funded by either a government or a private group. These expeditions were the height of popular culture in the 19th century. Many people would embark on these expeditions, even with an almost guaranteed death rate. Fame and honor often guided people to pursuing an Antarctic. This is shown in Frankenstein, as the novel begins with Robert Walton writing a letter to his sister/lover about the expedition he is going on. His primary reason for doing this is to gain fame and glory back home. Why do people go on polar expedition? Private groups embarking on these affairs often did so for competition between countries and groups to achieve milestone. However, they were incredibly dangerous, and many lives and ships were lost for this particular fad. There were four main goals governments hoped to achieve by traversing the Antarctic: the discovery and navigation of the Northwest Passage, connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans via a northern route, reaching the North Pole, traversing Greenland, and discovering the fate of the lost John Franklin expedition of 1845. The cost. Both government and private expeditions took part in exploring, and both experienced major losses. However, by both measures, the government expeditions fared poorly. They made fewer major discoveries, introduced fewer technological innovations, and were subject to higher rates of scurvy, lost more ships, and had more explorers die. It would have been substantially more safe to attend a private expedition, as they are much safer and better planned.
First sight. The first polar expedition took place in 1773, led by the British explorer Captain James Cook. He did not set foot on Antarctica nor even see the mainland. However, his circumventing of the Antarctic Circle is what allowed for further exploration of the region. In 1820, Captain Thetis von Bellingshon reported seeing an icy shore as well as tall icy mountains during a Russian expedition to the Antarctic territory. Although it is debated due to less than ideal conditions for vision, this is widely regarded as the first sighting of Antarctica. So he couldn't really see because of like all of the ice, and it was kind of during a storm. So basically, people are like, "Oh, he could have just seen, like, could have been a vision," but it is mainly known that he is the one who first sighted Antarctica. And it could have also been just an island, but still. Weddell. Only 3 years after Bellingshausen, James Weddell reached the farthest south ever traveled by an Antarctic explorer. This feat was honored by naming the sea, the Weddell Sea, after James himself. This expedition is even more impressive when considering the sea is heavily iced, hindering much early exploration. Both the Russian ship Vostok and British brig Williams were both halted in their tracks in an attempt to explore the sea in 1820. So as you can see in the bottom left, almost 100 years later, ships still get stuck in the ice, so it's just a really rough place to be, but Weddell traversed it. And as you can see on the right image, you have the ship, or what is depicted to be the ship, sailing the sea. James Clark Ross. Between 1839 and 1841, Captain Ross, commanding the Erebus and Terror, outlined the majority of the Arctic coastline. Ross discovered the Ross Sea, Victoria Land, and volcanoes Mount Erebus and Mount Terror. Creative naming, right? Most importantly, the expedition made the first notable charts of magnetic declination, magnetic dip, and magnetic intensity, in place of the much worse charts by Charles Wilkes. The complex shape of Earth's magnetic field is studied today, making the charts impressive even in today's standards. And as you can see, the absolute complexity of, in the middle, the image in the middle, you can see the absolute complexity that is magnetic dip, magnetic intensity, and magnetic declination. It's just kind of a mess, but he did outline this very successfully and highly accurately, which is very impressive for the technology at the time, almost 200 years ago. And at the bottom left, you can see James Clark Ross himself. And a side note, in exploration in between the two that I just talked about, in 31, John Biscoe became the third person to circumvent Antarctica, discovering new areas such as the Inderby Land and the Graham Land, which isn't really important enough to do a whole slide on because realistically it's just new land. It didn't really add much new much new science to the whole ordeal, and science is what Frankenstein is all about. So, Belgisa. Belgisa. Adrian and Gerlache became the first explorer to stay a full year in the Arctic after Belgisa, which is his ship, was icebound in the Bellingshausen Sea. Among the crew, Norwegian explorer Rode Amundsen would later become the first person to reach the South Pole, and Frederick Cook would later become the first man to reach the North Pole. So they have quite the crew, seeing as that even two, not even captains, but crew members were the first ever people to reach the two poles. So quite impressive. And really, this is just the beginning. I mean, in 1889, Karsten Bolshoi set out on an expedition that sparks the dawn of the heroic age of Arctic exploration. Borchgrevink and his crew were the first to spend significant amounts of time on mainland, as well as the first to use sled dogs to traverse long distances. The news that you could survive on the Arctic mainland was very significant. However, the average people didn't take much notice of the matter because it didn't really affect them. If you're just chilling in North America or even just Europe, you don't really care about what's going on in the Arctic. But the people who did have a lot of interest with the Arctic poles, magnetism, and anything of the matter took much inspiration from Bolshevik to go on their own journeys. And these journeys, this spark of more and more journeys that happened during this time period, is what we call the heroic age of Arctic exploration.